Hello, what I'm going to do in this video is introduce our next module, which is conservation biology at the level of populations. I'm going to set the context by looking at two species of extinct birds, the Kauai o'o and the Bachman's warbler. The Kauai, they are both species that are extinct, now thought to be extinct in the United States. And they are listed on the IUCN Red List as either extinct or critically endangered. We'll start here with the Kauai o'o. The Kauai is the northernmost major island of the Hawaiian Islands. It is a very dense forest. It's very hard to get in there and move around. You pretty much, researchers oftentimes you have to be dropped off by helicopter into this dense forest. There are some rare species of Hawaiian other honey creepers that are there, still extant, or not extinct yet. But all the conservation efforts that have occurred so far in Hawaii, including setting aside forest, was too late for the Kauai o'o. And all we have left of the Kauai o'o is our specimens, museum specimens, and some recordings of its song. So here is an example of the recording of its song. And on the IUCN Red List, if you look at the assessment history, it went from listed as threatened in 1988, to critically endangered in 1994, to extinct in all of the more recent assessments. And it's not been assessed since 2012, and it's probably not going to be assessed again because it has been confirmed as extinct. Is it possible there's still some Kauai o'os still out there? It's possible, but it's very highly unlikely, especially given that the species the males sing and can be heard. If they were around, they probably would have heard them by now. So this is a sad story, of course, and what you try to, this is much of the impetus of conservation biology is keeping this from happening. This is a lineage of birds which will leave no living descendants into the future. They are extinct forever, and there's no bringing them back at all. How about this? Here's another species that is found also in the United States, but on the mainland. This species once lived in the southeastern United States in swamps. And today what we have as far as swamps in the southeastern United States is just a tiny remnants of what used to be. Southeastern United States has been developed. Wetlands drained over the last 150 years. And of course, burgeoning, spreading tentacles of cities. And so what we have left is in national parks, state parks, and other conserved areas. You look at the IUCN Red List information for this species here, it's listed as critically endangered. So that's interesting. Let's take a look at the history of it was last assessed, it was last seen in 1988. It was last assessed in 2017. It's critically endangered. But notice here, it has not been confirmed yet as extinct. But the consensus is that it is extinct. So it went from threatened to critically endangered. It is now officially not extinct, but unofficially extinct. And as far as I know, there's no recorded calls available, at least that I can find online. If you look at this this is the Congaree National Park, which is one of those little fragments of wetland, of swamp land that's left in the southeastern United States. As you can see, you have Columbia, the major metro area there in South Carolina, and you have this protected area, the Congaree National Park. And there's other protected areas as well. So this is a dense, wet forest, lots of swamps. There's the Congaree River right there. And if the bird is still extant, then it's somewhere in here, but it has not been found yet. There are example of museum specimens in a drawer in a museum somewhere like the National Museum. And this is what we have left of it. And there's the Audubon painting of the Bachman's warbler. So this is what we're trying to avoid, because this is, humanity, at least some of humanity has decided this is an intolerable thing. You cannot let a species go extinct through when it's possible to save it, and when the reasons for its extinction was us humans. We have an obligation, a moral obligation to save it. What happened here is it is a species that was a clade, it evolved, it has an evolutionary history, and it just ends. Okay? It's over. So extinction is forever. You can't reverse it. And so this is why we have a moral imperative to save it. And much of conservation biology does focus on species, but when you actually go in to conserve species, you oftentimes conserve an entire ecosystem or a piece of that ecosystem. When you do that, you also conserve biodiversity. So what is the focus? Is it biodiversity or species? Well, it just depends on the question. We've been the last few weeks been focusing on biodiversity, the loss of biodiversity, the causes of the decline and what to do about it and how to measure it. But when you actually go in to do the research itself, oftentimes you end up focusing on populations. So I think the general public is really, when they think of conservation, they think of extinction. But as we've seen, the cause of extinction is oftentimes linked to the causes of the decline in biodiversity. It's measured by the Living Planet Index. We have recently, in the last 20 years, really brought the focus around on biodiversity, and for good reason, because you can't expect someone even a conservation-minded person, say somewhere in Europe, to really care much about something like the Bachman's warbler. You might care about species that you can kind of connect to yourself, or you see, but so when you frame it from the perspective of biodiversity, you are able to get more global support. And that is really a sort of a cohesive, integrative theme. For example, it's easy to get people to think about coral reefs. No matter where you are probably interested in the Great Barrier Reef off the coast of Australia, for example, even if you've never visited it before. And if you can save coral reefs, then obviously you save the species within those reefs. Wetlands, similarly. The draining of wetlands is continuing worldwide. We pretty much have stopped that in the United States, by the way. We have many of the national wildlife refuges are wetlands that have been conserved. Like here in Rhode Island, Nineveh National Wildlife Refuge, Trustham National Wildlife Refuge. Those are wet areas, wetlands that have been conserved. But worldwide, wetlands are still being drained. Okay, so wetlands are also a focus. Tropical forest, of course, this is probably the thing that globally got people thinking about conservation in the first place, was the destruction of the rainforest in Amazon. That was, rainforest, Amazon, that was something that was recognizable to almost anybody, anywhere who was interested in conservation. Tropical forest. But if you look at though, so there's getting the public, connected and engaged with conservation, and that is a focus on biodiversity. But now, how about what actually happens? So now let's think about what actually gets done in conservation biology. Well, let's take a look at the strongest environmental law probably ever passed, which is the Endangered Species Act in the United States. And this is, if you take NRS 407, it's something we really focus on, we dig into. The Endangered Species Act is targeted, of course, at keeping species from going extinct. But what's really important about it is it puts a spotlight on human activity, and it regulates human activity. You cannot, if there's an endangered species in a piece of land, for example, you cannot develop that piece of land without being in violation of the Endangered Species Act. If that species is listed, is endangered. And there's an entire, bodies of regulatory law associated with the Endangered Species Act. And the focus is on species, not on ecosystems. Think about the public. It's oftentimes fear of species extinction, which drives conservation funding and other efforts. Tigers, okay? The vaquita, a little endangered porpoise in the Gulf of California, that has grabbed the attention of the public. And that's one way to get the attention of the public is to sort of point out the plight of iconic species. One time the bald eagle was one of those iconic species. Now it is now abundant, maybe as abundant as it ever was. Now, in large part, thanks to the Endangered Species Act and other conservation focused laws. Grizzly bears. In the United States, grizzly bears are listed as threatened still, and there's been an effort to actually take them off the endangered species list, claiming with the argument being that they have recovered to that extent. Anyway, the point I'm making right here is that even if the species is the actual focus of your conservation efforts, when you go in to actually do the work, what are you working with? You're working with populations of that species. So rarely do you have the opportunity or do you actually focus on the whole species in your conservation effort. When you get out in the field or out wherever you're doing your actual work, you're dealing with populations. So grizzly bears in the lower 48 states of the United States are found only in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem in the area of Glacier National Park, with some very small populations left in Idaho and in Washington State in the Cascades. So those are, but the overall species is not endangered at all, but they are endangered in the United States. That is, populations of the species of grizzly bear are endangered in the United States, in Yellowstone and Glacier. We just mentioned before about the Living Planet Index, which is an index of the decline in population size across the board. In general, there's a signal out there of biodiversity loss, and we know it's there is because when we go in and look at population sizes of species that have been listed, we have a general tendency, a general trend downwards. So on average, population size and our range, the extent over which it is found, is shrinking, and the population size is decreasing. That's the general, on average, that is what's happening in the background. So in the next video, we'll take a look at, that's the introduction to populations, the focus on populations. In the next video, we'll think about the question of what is a population, because that is not an easy thing to define. Even though when we say a population, we all, you may have an idea for what you think that population is. You and I might agree on what a population is, but we're going to think about how to more explicitly define that.